speaking of all around the world, I'm currently, tuning in from a hot and humid Chennai. Where there is no concept of winter here. What about you guys? Dan, Ron, where are you tuning in from? Say hi to everyone.
Yeah, it's great to be with you, Artie. Thanks so much. Great to be with everyone. I'm in Michigan. It's cold, snow on the ground, ice storm right now, but it's getting warmer, so it's supposed to change the rain later today. But yeah, it's great to be with everyone.
Right. What about you, Ron?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining from. I'm Ron Eddings. I'm joining from Austin, Texas. It's usually nice and sunny and hot, just like for you, RT, but today it is a little rainy, but that is not going to affect this session at all.
Yes, that's good. So now, guys, now that you know where they're from, let me tell you a little bit more about this lineup that we have before we jump right into the question. We've got the legendary Dan Lawman in the house. To be honest, he is like the Gandalf of cybersecurity. He's internationally recognized. He's an award-winning blogger, and he's a best-selling author. And he's currently the field chief information security officer for the public sector at Presidio, where he advises government clients and brings in industry-best solutions. Oh, he also co-authored Cyber Mayday and the Day After, which is an Amazon bestseller, a super important read for cybersecurity folks. We'll be dropping the link in the chat, so make sure you add it to your cart and read it. And we've also got the one and only Rod Eddings, the maestro behind Hacker Valley Media. One of my favorite aspects about him is his mission to inspire, empower, and uplift the technology community through knowledge and human stories. Hacker Valley Media is like the biggest media company for cybersecurity, if not like climbing to be one of the biggest media companies in B2B, because they have not one, not two, but 6 different podcasts and video shows which covers all things cybersec. So, these two people are not here to mess around. They're going to tell you what's happening in 2024, and you better make notes of it because this comes with experience. And as you know, these sessions are recorded. Replay will start in the same link as soon as the session is completed, and you'll also be getting the recordings on your inbox, so stay tuned over there as well. All right, guys, I've done with the introduction. I've told them what's up. Are we ready to go?
Let's do it.
Ready to go.
Yes. Okay. So my first question is, if we look back at 2024, the strides we've made in security, all the high-profile incidents of companies which will remain nameless, but have been in the media for not so good reasons and not so good stories. What are some learnings that you recommend security leaders take when they look at this? Like, how do they look at this as a case study for future knowledge? Dan, do you want to start this?
Sure, thanks. And again, it's great being with you, Artie. You raised the bar really high, but it's real exciting, and it's going to be a great next 40 minutes. So yeah, 2023, the main story was Gen AI. I mean, Gen AI kind of stole the show in cybersecurity in every way. And, I do an end of the year blog for Government Technology Magazine. I just talk all about the details around that. But, how that plays out and what we can learn from that. First of all, it wasn't even on the list for most people at the beginning of the year as being a top prediction. I know we're talking about 24 predictions at the end of the session, but, the reality is that, the internet, going back 20 years, 30 years, when the internet was, first launched, the internet is an accelerator for both good and evil. There's so much good you can do, so many good things you can do with Gen AI and with, the internet, but it also, Gen AI just, supercharges that right now. The acceleration is even greater for both good and evil going into 24. So, I mean, reality is there's so many positive things we can do with Gen AI, but there's also so many different ways that it can be used as attacks. We just, seeing that this week in the U.S. in elections, deep fakes, lots of different ways. We'll talk about that, but lots of different ways that Gen AI can be used. And I think that's going to be the big story going forward. I think the other lessons people can learn and some of the basics I just mentioned quickly really are not new, but, I tell people, I tell CISOs, I mentor a lot of CISOs, stay hungry and humble. Anybody can be attacked at any time. We're always learning. There's new technology coming. There's new things happening, and your team has got to be humble and hungry. Make sure you're, people keep hearing this over and over again, but say back to the basics, but you got to take care of the patching, the backups, be ready for incident, practice, just like a football team does in sports. Be ready for different situations. Be ready, if you were attacked and hit by ransomware, have those backups that are immutable. Those basic things like patching, training, awareness. You need to make sure your enterprise keeps that top priorities and stay humble and hungry. So those are some of the big lessons I take away from 23.
Okay, that actually very succinctly put, and it's a bullet point learning like no other. Patching, learning, practicing, and then there's more. I mean, you can see it, but let me go to Ron. Ron, do you have more to add to this?
I'm not sure if everyone remembers the beginning of 2023, but there was a lot of layoffs end of 2022 heading into 2023. It kind of feels like we saw a little bit of a new wave of digital transformation, especially with some of the points that Dan was mentioning about generative AI. I know generative AI has not only infected the minds of everyone else, but it's also infected the mind of myself and my company. We use generative AI all the time. And with that, there comes with great responsibility. There comes, great risk as well. So one of the things that I've noticed is when it comes to things like generative AI, it has reignited the data sensitivity conversation. Where is my data going? Who is it being shared with? A lot of organizations that I spoke to this year seem to be very mindful of what is being shared with their vendors. And not only that, it seems like, looking at the digital transformation 2.0, it seems like there is a renewed purpose and energy in asset management and asset inventory, and not just the traditional IT asset inventory, but also looking at things like SaaS asset inventory. I've been seeing a lot of companies emerge, a lot of organizations put a lot of time and attention into that. And when you look at things like SaaS, there comes third-party risk as well. And, that's where organizations like Sprinto come into play, helping companies quickly and safely onboard additional security vendors or IT vendors to make their team productive and collaborative. So I would say, those are the three main bullets that stick out in my mind when I reflect on 2023.
Okay. I think that's actually a great way to think about it. And especially when we reflect, we kind of tend to forget how it all began. We only think about the biggest news flash that came in. But when we think of that from that perspective of beginning of the 12-month cycle had such a different scenario, and how we ended was in such a different place, it really puts things into perspective and makes you think of it in a high level. So thanks for that. Let's move on to the next question, which is keeping budgets, ROI, bleeding edge tech, and new modes of security threats in mind, because it's ever changing. The landscape is constantly evolving, constantly advancing. How can security leaders and CISOs manage their teams, and what are some guiding principles with which they have to guide teams during these tumultuous times? Ron, do you want to take this up?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that you just said that really stuck out in my mind is budget. Budget is an everlasting battle that we all face, but security has a big opportunity right now to reclaim their own budget, but also reclaim the budget for other teams within their organizations. I was just mentioning that SaaS inventory I've noticed as a hot topic in cybersecurity this year. With having something like a SaaS inventory, you can now start to understand which tools are used within your organization. I've been guilty of this, where an organization that I've worked at, and even at Hacker Valley, we've had tools that overlap and are a little bit duplicative of tools that we already have in our IT stack. So I think, with security teams, especially CISOs, there's a big opportunity to reduce the spend on things like SaaS products within your organization, but to also, inventory what you're using from a security perspective and work with your vendors to make sure that they're constantly differentiating their products from product A from product B to make sure that there's not a lot of overlap. One thing that I'm sure a lot of security vendors have a challenge with, and maybe even security leaders have a challenge with, is differentiation of products. A lot of them say the same thing, and it kind of feels like they're very similar. But I think with a little bit of investigation, time, and attention, we could get a little bit better at selecting the right tools and making sure that we're spending in the right places.
Okay. What about you, Dan? Like, what have you seen, especially having worked with companies which are with given both smaller resources and of course huge resources, like with like governments and MNCs alike? What has been the way? Has there been any changes with the way CISOs or security leaders look at it based on resources? And if yes, what's a recommendation you have for them?
Sure. Great questions. And I agree with Ron's perspectives as we head into 24. I think a little different tact. I think people process technology is something we've been saying for decades, right? But it's all really, when you talk about people being the biggest aspect of that, there's so many ways that those three things play with each other. And I'll just give a couple recommendations here around that. But, I've seen teams, government, small governments, private sector, public sector, whole teams leave, literally. And it's like, oh no, Frank left. Oh, Sarah left, and they're, they don't really have, they haven't done a good job with the processes. They haven't done a good job with, or they bring in new technology because the new people want the new technology. So now, that last year, one common theme across all last year, I keep hearing this, teams want to simplify, to Ron's point. They have 50 tools, they want to get to 25. If they have 100, they want to get to 50. But going back to the people, and literally CISOs sometimes make that worse by, a new person comes in, they don't know that tool, they go with another tool, and they still have licensing for the old tool. So that's a challenge. But I think focusing on the people piece of this for a minute, I think it really comes down with having, surrounding yourself with great people. And really, it's easy to say that, but even good people that you trust, that you know and trust, and then really focusing on making sure that those individuals, you take care of them. Because I've always found in my career in government and in Michigan, but a lot of other, I work all around the world now with teams. The really great teams are the ones that they trust each other, they work well together, they partner, they don't want to leave because it's not just about the money, it's also about your boss. Most people leave because they can't get along with their management. And so having a good relationship, knowing your team, what makes them tick, asking around to truly understand what's really, going well on the business side, the technical side, really having that is really important. Burnout continues to be an issue. A lot of headlines around teams being burned out. I just saw a headline this morning, 70% of CISOs want a new job. That's kind of scary. But what is your backup plan? One thing I tell CISOs, some advice, I'm almost like a really good football team or sports team or whatever. I'm always recruiting. Teams are always recruiting. If you find talent and they're available, it's not always in line with what position descriptions are open at the moment. We'll bring in talent if we see someone is all of a sudden made redundant, they're available. Keep that in mind. And I think most of all, build trust within your team, because if you can't trust your team, if management, and it's 360, it's the people under, your peers, your management, the vendor partners you work with. If you don't have trust within your team, you have no hope of being successful against the bad actors that are trying to break into your enterprise. And so, I just, some of these things may sound, well, Dan, how's that different than 5 years ago? But, some of the basics, we're in a marathon, not a sprint. This is a marathon. This is not going to be like a year from now. If we come back and Ron and I are on next January, we're going to still have cyber challenges. This is not going away in my lifetime. And so you want to really have teams that you trust, have team members that you trust, and really build a good culture, and really make sure you keep that culture. I think those are some of the top themes.
Okay, that's it's interesting because whenever we think about cybersecurity challenges, and the mind automatically goes to more like fancy things, and looking at Ron's cool shirt, like I think of hackers and like very cool different not that known technology that comes from from dark web or something. I'm not very sure. I'm a novice at this, but it really does bring to a light that trust, and at its core people are what really matter here, and it's having that kind of a culture can help you solve a host of problems. And that's a really nice thought, and that's a really important thing to think about, even as security leaders broaden their teams and get bigger in context. which brings me to the idea of future risk, where we're always on the lookout for what could potentially happen, and like not just firefighting our day, but like thinking about the potential risk of a particular action that we take. So when we think of planning for future risk, what should businesses do to be better at it? Like, I'm just putting it in a very crude manner, but it's just that thinking of future risk or like just planning for it alone doesn't matter. But what are some practices to put in mind? Should security leaders actually put budget in for some kind of research and development? Should they start something like that? Is it something that needs to be given better thought than just say, yeah, we have to look at the future and we have to be future first and just leave it at that? Ron, any thoughts?
That is a whole can of worms. I think that we all go into organizations thinking about that, like, oh, when I take this new gig, whether I'm a individual contributor, a manager, or a CISO, I'm going to make sure that I make this place better than when I joined. And that's always our intention. Unfortunately, in security, it can feel very reactive because we're responding to new bits of information, new insights. We might get a new tool, and then all of a sudden, now we have new information that we didn't previously have that we have to now take care of and address. But I think that the best thing that anyone can do is, like, during that onboarding time, during a slow time where you're not working on incidents or implementing yet another tool or process, is to get a lay of the land. In threat intelligence, something like this would be called crown jewel analysis. But I think that all security leaders should be doing some sort of crown jewel analysis, understanding what are the functions of the business and doing a little bit of pathfinding. I look at this as like being a little bit of an FBI investigator, where you're reaching out to team members that you normally wouldn't reach out to, just to understand what are their workflows, what are some of those opportunities that they may have from a business perspective, but also from what opportunities do the attackers have, and document them. At some point, you're going to have a long list. It's going to feel overwhelming at some points, but you really have to just focus on communicating with your stakeholders and picking out the tasks and opportunities that are going to matter most to your security team and maybe even the organization, and starting there. I think, the best way to move Mount Everest is piece by piece. And it's important to remember that when, embarking into the security world.
Well said. And Dan, what has been your thoughts on it? And like when you
Ron made some great points. I think, again, I like to focus on these. And let me just clarify one thing I meant. Clearly technology is very, very important. We're in the technology industry, and Ron and I work in that, each and every day. All of us on this probably are technology professionals. But, I've seen tool sets, the greatest tool sets, that were not implemented properly, again, with processes that people don't really even, lots of tool sets that aren't even being used by enterprises. People are paying licensing fees and things that aren't used properly. So I think, again, I approach this question around risk starts at the C-suite. It starts at executives. What's the relationships like between your CISO? Make sure you have the right CISO up front, the right leadership, but also the relationships. What's the view of how it's viewed in your enterprise from a risk perspective? How are all risks being handled from the CFO's office? Financial risks of, obsolescence of, from business perspective. Are security risks in cybersecurity, are they in that wider risk conversation in your business? And really, hopefully, again, that there's right conversations are happening with the C-suite, with the board. We're in a time when, especially with AI and Gen AI, all the things we've already said, and we're going to talk about, 2024 in a moment, about the future. You have to get comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, because we're in an environment where it's rapidly changing. And, I think back a year ago or 2 years ago, even, what the top vendors were saying, and Microsoft and Google and, and OpenAI and everything, where we were just a year ago, where we are today, and Gen AI and all of these, and the tool sets across the cyber industry are just rapidly changing. So, really having a mindset of, really thinking through, preparing for the unexpected, having scenario planning, around what if these different scenarios would happen. I think a lot of organizations already do. tabletop exercises, but do they really stretch themselves with those tabletop exercises, for example? Do they really, do they just kind of check the boxes and say we did this and or do they include the business? Do they really think through different scenarios? And I ask at seminars I do around the world, how many of you were prepared when Russia went into Ukraine and what the implications of that were? And almost no hands went up. And of course that happened. I'm not a doom and gloom guy. I believe we've got to come with solutions, not just problems. But we also need to think through various scenarios. It might be supply chain disruptions. I mean, God forbid something like China went into Taiwan or something major happened. What would that do to your business? I mean, that's really outside the box for most organizations. I'm not saying everybody needs to be ready for that scenario, but you need to think outside the box around what could or might happen, and then practice those. Practicing makes perfect. Being, and the more you practice, the more you can. I'm thinking sports and football now. We just had a big, playoffs in the U.S. and U.S. football, but we have a championship games coming this Sunday. And I'm here in Detroit, and we're finally in the finals for first time in 30 years. But it's getting to a point where you're comfortable. In situations that your team is ready to respond in various different scenarios that you planned and you practiced.
Okay, that's it gives a lot to think about, especially if security leaders to reckon with themselves. How actively are they thinking about the future? Does it just exist in a Word doc somewhere or a brainstorming exercise somewhere, never to be revisited? Good food for thought, and I hope that our audience here, LinkedIn, YouTube, are thinking about it in earnestness. And if you do have questions, I think we will also be dropping Dan and Ron's LinkedIn here, so feel free to reach out to them there to talk further about it. And if you want to, get an understanding about how they do what they do. Now we get to the final question, and if I do play drums, I would be doing the drum roll. What's going to happen in 2024? What's the big thing that's going to come in? We're going to have Ron and Dan give their top 3 predictions, and they're going to tell that in order of how likely it's going to be. And I'm going to make sure that I'm going to put this on LinkedIn, and we're going to come back and see how true it is. And let me tell you, I like my chances over here, but I'm going to get started first with Dan. What's your top 3?
Yeah, so I just real quickly, I mentioned some of these I do a report every year, and I know this posted in the chat. These are not Dan Lorman's predictions, but I do a report across all the different industry reports that come out, and then I give awards from those. So I will try and give credit to the people, but my favorite ones, I'll give you some. And the Gen AI and AI just stole the show this year, all around AI. What's going to happen with AI? Probably my favorite one starting out with is bring your own AI will take off, will accelerate. And we've all heard bring your own device, BYOD. This is bring your own AI or bring your own Gen AI. And what that really means is, a lot of organizations talk about, hey, I could have my own learning LLM, my own large language model. I can have control my data. But in many organizations, they're piloting that, they're thinking about it, they're trying to budget for it. But the reality is, in many cases, not all cases, it could cost millions of dollars. And a lot of people don't have that. So in the meantime, what do? They're like, I'm going to bring my own free AI. So I'm going to we call it shadow AI or shadow IT. Whether they're bringing their own, bringing ChatGPT or Google Bard or whatever it is, they're bringing the AI they have at home, and they're using it at work. And of course that brings risk and that brings challenges because, not just, what data has that been trained on? People use that for coding, people use that for a variety of things. And so I think that's a huge challenge for organizations. And the answer for CISOs and for security pros is, do you even know what's going on in your enterprise? Who's using what? If you're in a large enterprise, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 employees, do you really know who's actually using ChatGPT for work? I'm talking about the free version out there, or the $20 version from home, or Bard, and not Vertex AI from Google. I mean, that's the thing people are doing, and the problem is there's some good with it and they're seeing benefit, but obviously it could create risk. And so bring your own AI is a huge challenge. I think organizations need to think like with companies. I hate to name company names, but the old way that we used to think about, shadow IT. You need to think about shadow AI now, and you need to think about how, you can know, what's going on there. I think that's a whole big A. So bring your own AI is going to be huge. I think, we're already seeing this. So this is almost a fake prediction that's fake. Deep fakes. We're going to see elections. We already saw this week. It was on my list back in December. So you're going to see this. Deep fakes and people impersonating people. We already saw this in the USA. There was reports around people getting messages, phone calls from Biden that not vote today in New Hampshire primary. I mean, we did predict that back in December. So it's a little bit late to be saying this now. But using, again, that Gen AI used for bad actors, it can be used for people, and stories around, more and more acceleration around people. They think it's their grandmother. I need $100. I need $1,000. Can you send it? I was in a car accident. Don't tell my parents. Just send me money. And it's going to sound like your granddaughter or your whoever. And those challenges are going to accelerate. I think people. That's going to be a challenge. And then I'm going to give credit to CISO, to Gartner here. Another one I really like. CISOs will get more power and a broader role for several years to come. Gartner says that. I believe that. I think the role of the CISO is now growing. Security's importance is growing. And that comes with responsibility, right? But from the business perspective, I think thinking about what are we doing around AI? What are we doing around Gen AI? How are we protecting that? And again, I don't want to name vendors here, but thinking about how you can understand what your enterprise is doing right now and how you can enable the good and disable the bad. How can you stop people from doing things you don't want them to do? Maybe you'll let them use ChatGPT, but not let them upload code from your main systems, or you're not going to let them send sensitive data with up to the cloud or whatever it might be. There's steps you can take to be able to control that. And so those are my 3 top predictions.
Okay. Wow. I mean, you can see more about this written in Dan's reports. Yeah, it's just been linked as well. But really, really well put. Ron, are you up to follow up with that?
I don't know about that. I think that Dan definitely got all of the best predictions, and he's well researched, so I expect nothing less. So awesome on that, Dan. I'll give 3. There's definitely gonna be some overlap, but I'll give out 3 headlines. The first headline reads: social engineering becomes the top attack vector. And not just the classical social engineering, which we know is phishing, but what Dan was alluding to, deep fakes is a very powerful and effective strategy to get in front of someone and make them believe that it's something else. We see this even when people impersonate others, especially we look at the MGM hack that happened last year. It was just a phone call impersonating someone. Those types of things are only going to get better. Second headline reads, from a security perspective, security endpoints implement browser extensions. Dan brought up a really good point about people are using something called shadow AI. I never heard that term. I really love that, Dan. I'm definitely going to post it on my LinkedIn and mention you on that. Shadow AI is definitely going to be the thing. But I believe it will ultimately be welcomed this year, where we're like, okay, there's nothing that we can do to stop people from using these tools. Let's allow them to use them, but let's put some guardrails on top. With something like a browser extension, you can start to monitor the user's activity and say, hey, before you paste that into ChatGPT, did you check out our security policy? I think we're going to start seeing those gentle coaching and gentle reminders in security. And then the third headline, what it reads is security professionals have stepped their game up with
Yes.
the advent of LLMs. I think we now have the opportunity to get out of the firefighting. I know that I spent a lot of my career looking at alerts that did not really mean that much. There are things like large language models that we can use and leverage to say, hey, I've trained myself and my team on this thing and how to respond to it, whether it's an alert or an incident that just keeps on happening, but it's important to review. I think we're going to start seeing large language models start to address some of those tedious and mundane things that don't take the creative part of our mind, which is going to step up the game of the cybersecurity professional.
Amazing. I love that it's written in headline style. It's easy to go back and see. And honestly, I learned so many new terms and so many. It's very futuristic to know it. So I'm really excited to see how this pans out. We've been receiving a ton of questions from LinkedIn, YouTube, and we've been reading out the ones that are coming up the most. And thanks, Raj, you've added it to Q&A. I'm just going to get started right now. First ones, are there specific strategies you recommend for orgs to secure their implementation of, say, ChatGPT or LLMs?
There is a awesome organization that I had an opportunity to speak to recently. They were called Layer X, and they are creating a browser extension that they have created a browser extension that is kind of like an endpoint agent that allows you to start to govern your users and their usage for not only things like ChatGPT or any large language model, but sites in general. It's very difficult to monitor and instruct your users to do the right thing when it comes to something like Google Drive, because it's just the domain is drive.google.com. But with something like with companies like Layer X, and there's many of them out there that are doing governance for the browser, I think that is one of a great areas to at least investigate and look at for any company.
Yeah, I would add, I agree. And I think CASB, I'm going to go ahead and name some vendors. I've been holding back on this, but I'll name a couple different ones like Zscaler, Netscope. There's your traditional CASB vendors, and there's a whole suite of them that you can use. So that's cloud access security brokers. Some of you say, Dan, that's old technology back to 2016, 2017, but they've refreshed that now and around AI. And so they have new tool sets, and they're saying, not just saying you can't do anything with these tools. They can enable some and disable you or redirect you. A lot of them have DLP, data loss prevention, built into them, and they can say, we'll allow you to do ABC with ChatGPT or Bard or whatever, but we're not going to let you do these other things. We're not going to let you upload sensitive data. We're not going to let you upload code. We're not going to let you, or we're going to redirect you to another one that is authorized. So, and the best part of that, I mentioned this earlier, but you need visibility into what's already happening. And so a tool suite like that, like a traditional CASB, gives you visibility. What are people already doing across your 10,000 employees, 50,000 employees? What's happening right now? Who's going to what? And giving you that dashboard of what people are doing today also can help you say, hey, maybe we need to go from a Google Bard to a Google Vertex AI, and we need to get the paid version, and we need to protect it, and we need to do these steps. And different companies will help you with that. But it starts with visibility. You need to have that visibility. Now, I would start there.
Okay. I hope that answers your question. We will be linking everyone's LinkedIn's if you want to reach out to them and chat more about it. Sorry, we have to move forward for the next one. Do you think AI in security and compliance is the future?
I'm jumping. Yes. I mean, it's. I was at a conference in Indianapolis at the end of last year, and one person stood up. They almost started crying. They're like, "I don't want to do AI." I'm like, she's like, "Can I stay in the industry?" And I'm like, "How old are you?" And she's like, "I don't know, in your 30s." I don't know exact age, but she's like, "I'm 32 or something." I said, "Yeah, you got to do AI." I mean, it's. I mean, it's not the only game in town, but I mean, the reality is that it's going to be a part of everything we do. It's going to be built in. There's going to be special tool sets, but absolutely AI for security and compliance. It's going to play a role. But the good news is this: that we're also going to see the need for knowledge workers, for security professionals. It's not going to take your job in the next, I mean, I'm not going to say 20 years from now, but next 10 years, we need more security pros. We need knowledgeable people who can use these tools. Think about retraining. I talk about being uncomfortable, but learn. I mean, one of the best quotes I heard, a few years back was, and I say, if you don't know something, learn it and then teach it to others. Sign up to teach your team about whatever the new tool set is, the new AI, the new Gen AI, the new function that you have in your SOC, and go research it and then teach others and give the information away. The more you can teach others and stand in front of them and answer questions and go back and get the answers, the better you're going to be. It's going to make you a better employee, a better security professional, a better technology professional, and then you're also going to help the team. So that becomes a win-win-win all the way around.
Thanks. Ron, do you have anything to add to this?
I love the fact that Dan just mentioned learning and teaching. I just dropped a comment in the chat that I've heard from a lot of people that I really respect and admire. Is if you teach it, you get to if you teach it, you get to learn it twice. I think that's very powerful. I 100% agree. And I would say, when it comes to the compliance and AI, it's not just AI, it's automation. I think automation is the future. And it really depends on how you want to leverage that automation. AI is a form of automation. It's taking input and it's providing us output without our intervention. And I think that's what we all aspire to create for our workflows is inputs and outputs without a lot of work in the middle. And that's one of the things that I love about what you all are building at Sprinto is kind of like that automation piece for compliance. So not only, is there a lot of things with AI out there, I would say don't forget about the basics, and you're here with Sprinto, so don't forget to check them out on that aspect. But yeah, I would say automation is my go-to answer for that.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. I mean, like going back to the basics to cover that. I love that. We have one last question. I'm just opening that up. Do we have proper tools for AI security governance? Either.
Ron, want to go first?
Yeah.
Sure. I think it depends. It depends on what your use cases are. It depends on what your requirements are. I think that there's things that are emerging out there that can serve as a starting point, but is there anything comprehensive? I think it just depends on how large your organization is. If you're working at a Fortune, even 500 or even publicly traded company, I don't know that there's something comprehensive, like a one thing that you can do or one tool that you can leverage, but I'm sure there's a series of tools that you can leverage, but also, like I said, back to basics. Sometimes humans are the best way to do something until there's a technology that exists. So I think that there might be some levels of manual intervention that, just tools aren't able to do yet.
Yeah, I would agree. I think great answer. And I loved the way you began because I do that all the time. It's like, who's the we here, right? So, it depends. It's like, I don't know what company you work for who's asking this. Maybe you don't have it. I've been at companies that did it all with spreadsheets. I mean, it's like, are you kidding me? I mean, so it really depends on, do they exist in the world? I think one of the challenges is that, as I mentioned earlier, and things keep changing so fast, right? And if you go back and you look at, what tools did we get back, to do governance, security governance 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, and you go back and I go back and I read, this is going to be the one tool to rule them all, right? This is going to be the perfect thing that's going to solve all of our problems. Well, as soon as you talk about the one thing that's going to solve all of your problems, I'm already getting worried, right? I mean, again, it's people, process, technology, and you need all three. There are some great security governance tools out there. A lot of them are not even implemented, or I love the line we used a few years back. I'm rambling a little bit here, but somebody asked me, do you have single sign-on? When I was at the state of Michigan as a CISO, so, oh yeah, we love single sign-on. We have so many we have 20 of them, right? I mean, every agency had their own single sign-on. So it's like, that was meant to be a joke. But I mean, the reality is we did have about 7, and we had to consolidate. We got down to about 3, right? And it's 20 different agencies. They all wanted to do what they wanted to do. I think a lot of organizations are still like that. They've got stovepipes. They've got different tool sets. They've got fiefdoms. And so I think it really is a challenge. Whatever tool set you're using, my advice would be, hopefully you've got a top tool set. Look at, Gartner, Forrester, whoever you like to look at your, get one of the top tools and make sure it's properly implemented and the people are properly trained and it's being used. Because I think that's why I keep harping when people process technology, because I see people with great tools that aren't implemented or that are not maintained, or they were one and done. They were done great. 3 years ago, we brought this great team in and we did all these wonderful things. Yeah, but that was 3 years ago. I mean, what are you doing about tomorrow? What are you doing about yesterday? So I hear that with tabletop exercises. I hear that in a lot of areas. Like, we had this great tabletop exercise back in 2019. Well, that's 5 years ago, people. I mean, I don't really want to hear about what you did in 2019. What have you done for me lately? So, I mean, it's got to be repeatable processes, and you got to really be utilizing the tools with well-trained people. But I think, to Ron's point, is there a perfect tool out there? I don't think so. But it's utilize what you've got, make sure that people are trained on it, and that you have a repeatable process.
Okay, well said. And I think it's more than security. It's everything. If you think that one thing can solve all your problems, you'll have to rethink that. That's just impossible. I think that's life advice as well as security advice, if any. With that, we come to the end of the questions that we wanted to pick up. I'm sorry if we weren't able to take all of them. We do want to keep the webinars concise in the interest of your time. So if there are questions that I see, I'll make sure that I'll reach out to Dan and Ron so that they get to answer it, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible.